An attack on free speech in the West, and it most commonly manifests right now in Britain, where people are either being detained or jailed for free speech violations. They said the wrong thing, the thing that the government didn't want them to say. And the latest is George Galloway, a former MP. He's 70 years old, was recently detained ostensibly because of his political views, not being in compliance with what the English authorities wanted. Well, this could be a harbinger for things to come in the United States, so Tucker talks to him about it, so let's check that out. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
George Galloway, thank you very much for doing this. I'm sitting in London, in the city of London right now. I'm an American. You're a citizen of the country I'm sitting in, but you're not in this country. You're in another country. Why are you there, and when are you coming back?
Well, it's a long and difficult story. It started last month when my good wife and I were detained but not arrested by the anti-terrorism police at Gatwick Airport in London. Now, ponder that piece of Kafkaesque framing. You are not under arrest, but you are not free to leave, they said. These pistol-packing anti-terrorist cops. They said you have no right to silence, and if you refuse to answer any of our questions, you will automatically be guilty under the Terrorism Act of an act in defiance of that very serious act. And the policeman joked, good luck ever getting on an airplane again. Now, to complete the framing, I'm 71 years old, 7 times elected Member of Parliament, a member of the British Parliament across 5 decades, the leader of a British political party, the biggest broadcaster in Britain, not nearly as big as you, but the biggest British broadcaster in Britain, broadcasting to the largest audience every single week. I'm one of the best known people in the country, and I've got armed anti-terrorist police telling me I'm not under arrest, but I am not free to leave. And of course, it quickly turned out that the purpose of the pull, the detention, was speech. My podcasts, my broadcasts, my tweet output, my Facebook output. That's the Britain that we now have today.
Yeah, isn't that sick and twisted and so ironic when it comes to the fact that in many ways the legal precedents that ended up in defining free speech as an integral part of the West and Western values, Western individual rights come from Britain? That this was based on a long series of precedents. Man, of course, has the right to speak naturally, but this was codified into the English Bill of Rights as a repudiation against James II, who was trying to deny that right to Protestants and enact a Catholic-based regime. And there was a bloodless revolution essentially to overthrow him. It was called the Glorious Revolution of 1688. And that's why, in many ways, we have this defining precedent that the United States patriots, the United States founding fathers, built upon. That the fact that we do have free speech as a result of natural law, as a result of our creator, but we're going to codify that constitutionally. Well, they're violating this. And he is the leader of a party. He's the leader of the Workers' Party in Britain, a long-term MP. He does have a podcast. And guess what? He calls for peace. And that's about the most big cardinal sin that you can do these days, calling for peace. He opposes Israel. He opposes NATO and the US and the UK's war, the proxy war versus Russia. And for that, they're trying to detain him. It's, a horrifying prospect that this could leak into the United States and play a role here too.
And we spent 4 hours in my case, 5 hours in my wife's case, in 2 separate rooms, surrounded by armed police officers, being questioned about our political views. And in my wife's case, her fingernail, which is painted rather nicely in the Palestine colors. Now, if you had told me 8 weeks ago that such a thing was even remotely possible, I would not have believed you. There is no more patriotic British citizen than me. In the last decade, Mr. Carlson, I fought 2 major battles for the British state. 2014, The Spectator said, my speeches saved the Union, when Scotland's separatist referendum looked very much like it was going to succeed. And 2016, I was one of the leading figures in the Brexit movement, trying to win Britain's independence. And so here I am, sitting in a police station in Gatwick Airport with armed men questioning me on my political views.
And that's all it takes. If you support any kind of secession, as Brexit was, peaceful secession from the European Union, that was supported by a narrow majority of the English populace. But when it was, you didn't hear all this clamor among the forces that are so keen to defend democracy in every case say, hey, well, I guess democracy spoke. No, there was a concerted effort to try to push that back, and you had heroes like George Galloway and Nigel Farage that saved that prospect for Britain. I think we could use a little bit of that sentiment in the United States now with a Leviathan federal government that tries to commandeer the states and reign as an oligarchy above 330 million people. But George is put in this situation because he wants peace. How ironic is that when they'll make you president or prime minister when you support wars, but try to end one and they'll paint you as a supervillain. They'll pretend you're an enemy of the state, persona non grata, that should be detained for your political views. Just think of that.
So the trauma of all that, to be honest, being outside of the country is the least of it. If I tell you, and nobody knows this except you and me and whoever watches, it literally broke my heart. I now have a cardiologist. I'm a man who never lost a day through illness at work in my entire life. And now I have a heart condition, arrhythmia, which the consultant cardiologist, a very fine one, tells me is of recent provenance. So you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out that these cops actually broke my heart.
First of all, let me just commend you for your very long string of good calls. You were against the Iraq War, you were against Scottish secession, and you were for Brexit. So I don't think there are many people who can say they were right in all three. But I'm confused as to why a 70-year-old former member of parliament would be considered a terror threat. And what was the pretext for doing this to you? Do you know?
Well, the Terror Act, through which I sat in its passage and opposed it every line, precisely because of the possibility of its abuse in this kind of way, allows the police to seize your documents, seize your telephone, your laptop, seize everything, only at the port. They would need a warrant to do it anywhere else in the country, and they'd be very unlikely to get one in regard to me. But they saw the opportunity of stopping me under that act and divesting me of my whole life.
And just think of how sickening that is. And he's not the only one. He's a prominent person, and I'm glad it's being covered because of his prominence. You do this to a prominent person, it's going to get a lot more coverage. But there are viral videos going around on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram of people being questioned by the authorities in Britain for this. The bastion of free speech. The birthplace of, constitutional free speech in so many regards, where this is happening. And then you had Democrats in the last election cycle calling for more policing of disinformation on the internet, taking after Britain. You had Kamala Harris and AOC and Tim Walz and Hillary Clinton doing that. And now you have Republicans trying to crack down on free speech as it pertains to Israel. If you're a critic of Israel, you won't have the same speech rights, say, in terms of receiving federal disaster relief. That story came up, a few months ago. This is a potential big issue that could set a precedent if it seeps into the United States. You could have a Ministry of Truth literally prosecuting these crimes in a way that's so senseless and anti-American, it's hard to even portray it accurately as, how egregious that would be.
Everything, my parliamentary correspondence, my legal correspondence, my personal family pictures, my political correspondence, the members of my party, the membership list of my party, and they took it. And this is precisely the abuse of the word terrorism that you saw in London yesterday, where old ladies, old men, people in wheelchairs, blind people, are being arrested under the Terrorism Act for holding up a placard, a little piece of cardboard at their breast, and they are being taken away under terrorism charges. This is the nightmare that is Britain. Your stature will definitely not be a cause for your being huckled in the way that I was. You are a very big global figure. They wouldn't dare to touch you to get your telephone, to get your laptop. But if they could even do it to me, then I ask you to ponder just who would be safe in Britain from that.
Wow, I mean, that is true. If they'll go after this prominent former MP, they will go after you. They certainly will. And this is based off the Terrorism Act of 2000 in Britain. It's also called Martin's Law, that was enacted to kind of fight against terror. It was part of, the grand war on terror drive that we saw in the United States, too, that brought us the Patriot Act and the DHS and, 20 plus year occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq. We got the surveillance state expanding broadly during that time frame. They'll always take these precedents that are left in a legal context and then apply them internally to dissidents. They said that this was only for terrorism. Well, they're going after George Galloway now. And guess what? Me and George have a lot of differences in things like economics, but I don't care. He's a hero for standing against this, for standing for free speech when so many of his fellow Britons, especially in the political class, will not fight for it. Not whatsoever. And will they not fight for it? Not only will they not, they'll drive in this absurd prosecution campaign against dissidents to completely annihilate free speech.
So, to complete my answer to your first question, I'm not going back to Britain until I know that that will not happen again, not least because of the health problem that it has given me after the first time. And they will not give me an assurance that it will not happen again. And if you think about it, why would it not happen again? Because it happened because of my broadcasts and the fact that the British state and the Stumer, Keir Starmer, who leads it for the moment, at least, don't like what I say on my podcast. Well, I'm still broadcasting every Sunday and Wednesday, and I still have the same point of view.
Amen. That's the attitude we all need to have. That's incredible. I love that response by him.
So there's no guarantee whatsoever that the same thing wouldn't happen to me again. My wife couldn't sleep or eat for weeks after it. She's already thin. She lost 10 pounds nearly in weight as a result of the trauma of this occasion. We knew that it had happened to other people, but we didn't think that we would be regarded as other people because of the position I have over 50 years in politics in Great Britain. But it did happen, and it could happen again.
What did they accuse you of doing wrong? Had you called for armed insurrection against the Starmer government, or what was their claim?
No, I don't even believe in that. Never mind call for it. I believe in democracy. I believe in freedom of speech. That's the problem. We are governed by a prime minister and a pygmy cabinet, which rubber stamps every cockamamie scheme he has to take us into war with Russia. Now, I don't want to go to war with Russia, not for Russia's sake, but for Britain's sake, for the sake of the British people whose blood and treasure would be burned, and the British people whose country might disappear into cinders and ash.
Yeah, so just listen to that. Because he wants to avoid a war with a nuclear power and he opposes censorship, that's why they detained him. That's why they questioned him. That's why they put his family, including his wife, through all this turmoil. And think of that. Think of that potential. And then the fact that some people want to unleash this hellscape in America. And it's just too absurd, man. It's just too anti-American. It's just too senseless and just completely outside of the principles of the best things that we hold dear in our society.
Underneath their feet if such a war were to take place. So the proximate reason, insofar as one can glean it from 4 hours of circumlocution, is that I oppose the British government's policy towards Russia. Now, I might be right on that. I might be wrong on that. But as John Stuart Mill points out, if you deny a point of view the right to be heard, the loser is not the person with that point of view,
Yes.
but the rest of us.
Yeah, so think of that. This Terrorism Act of 2000, used to try to safeguard Britain from terrorist threats, is being wielded against anti-war dissidents like George Galloway for opposing war with Russia. Think about that. And if that law can be so arbitrarily applied to heroes like George Galloway, just think of what they'll do to eliminate dissent towards wars in the future. If he goes down for this, if they can detain him and that becomes a precedent, and guess what? If someone goes further beyond that and says, don't sign up for conscription because of this, like they tried to ban during World War I in the United States, the Espionage Act, they'll push it even further. They'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing until we're all the enemy. We're all the terrorists. And that's exactly what the deep state does to try to ruin our lives. We saw it with the War on Terror. This has been used for FBI entrapment schemes in the United States. In January 6th, the Whitmer kidnapping plot, the bridge plot in Ohio. It happens time and time again.
Because we will not hear what might actually turn out to have been good advice. But that's not the way these social democrats, Christian Democrats, all across Europe, have put the lights out on freedom of speech, lights out on democracy. They're interfering in elections. They're canceling other people's elections. They are throttling free and independent media. They are bankrolling stooge media to try and crowd it out. They are threatening the social media platforms with sanction and even closure if they don't kowtow to the prevailing orthodoxy. And I'm afraid Britain is in the vanguard of all of that. And I make this point. I'm not saying this because I hate Britain,
Yes.
but because I love it. It is an ache for me to be outside of my country all of this time. I have children there. I have a house there. I have a very keen addiction to the English Premiership in football, soccer, you call it. I'm torn from all of that. I'm torn from my family and friends. So it's a dull ache for me. But it's not as painful as another armed arrest by the anti-terrorism squad would be. So for the time being, it looks like my wife and I are around the world in 80 days. And
Yeah, I mean, George is a real hero, if you ask me. He is a guy that stands on the best principles of his society, that his society was once known for. These individual rights, individual liberties had been denied. Kings had violated them all the time. The Stuarts, certainly, Charles I, King John, Henry VIII. Of course, there were kings that violated the most sacred precepts of England, but those sacred precepts, which recognize natural law, are things that he is defending, in contradiction to his government that wants to punish him for this. Detain him, stop him from conducting his affairs, and who cares what kind of ramifications that has on his family. He's not the youngest spring chicken, and his wife is suffering over this more than him, it seems like. But I'm so glad that he's doubling down. He's not apologizing. He's saying this is why it happened, and I'm still broadcasting. I love that part. That unapologetic attitude is the attitude that will save the West. It will save both Britain and the United States. And really, the only thing I disagreed with what he said is, if I was a Brit, I would probably support the secession of Scotland for the same reason that if I'm an American, I would support the secession of California. That would be beneficial for both parties in both countries. Fair enough if he doesn't have that perspective, and to some extent it doesn't matter because I'm not British. But at the same time, the Scots are more socialist leaning. They don't have, my same general attitudes toward those subjects. as far as I see it, they can secede peacefully. That's what I would want for places in the United States that would not want to be controlled by Washington, including California, and it would benefit them for leaving if they are so distraught by the way things operate in Washington. Same thing with Texas. I don't care about the political leanings. I think that would be beneficial to all parties to some extent. But at the same time, everything else I totally agree with. And it doesn't really matter to some extent because, like I said, I'm not British. But George Galloway is really a hero, man. And he is just one of those dissident guys that's so interesting. A lot of Americans don't know who that is. But he's a really interesting guy with pretty, conservative-leaning proclivities, but also, he's an open socialist, and he's anti-war, but he's also very pro-free speech. The kind of politician that you just don't see in the United States at all. He really is kind of an aberration in Britain, too, but this is just horrifying. This cannot serve as a harbinger for the United States. We cannot allow these draconian free speech laws to go into effect and just propagandize them as if it's saving the United States, providing security. We can't emulate this pattern. It's destroying Britain. It so clearly is. And I'm so glad in a way that this is being exposed because of the George Galloway story. Hate the fact that he was detained. But thankfully, this is getting more coverage than I think it's ever gotten. So thanks, George and Tucker. Great interview segment. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel, too. And please subscribe to Tucker. This is an awesome segment, like I said. What do you guys think? Do you think this is a precursor to what we're likely to see in the United States, regardless of who runs our country or who's elected in 2028 or otherwise? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, like I said. And also, if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. And if you do that, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. You'll be able to see those members-only videos right away. And also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. I'll shoot that out to you in PDF form right to your email. No cost, no obligation, just because you're awesome for watching my channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.
But if you ever do look into what's happened in Gaza since October 7th, it's shocking. Bibi is running around the world saying, I've got Trump in my pocket. I can do whatever I want. Trump will defend me. He's told a lot of people that. I control the United States Congress. I control the White House. I control the U.S. He's said that on tape. You can call it whatever you want. Genocide. Everyone's like, why? It's genocide. Okay, it doesn't matter what you call it. That's murder. You're killing people on purpose.
Israel's atrocities in Gaza are absolutely evil and unconscionable. That's what Tucker Carlson is saying here in this clip, where he exposes the negative side, the dark side of the U.S.-Israeli alliance. And in this clip, he gets into why that relationship with the United States isn't beneficial for Americans, and why they use Qatar as projection in saying that there's so much influence from that government in our system, when we all know the truth that it's Israeli influence in our government. Let's watch. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Qatar is a lot better for the United States than Israel has been. A lot better by any measure. And if you disagree, tell me a way in which Israel has been better for the United States than Qatar. You could say, well, what about Jerusalem? And that's an excellent point. There's no city in the world more important or more beautiful, more humming with spiritual energy than Jerusalem. But Jerusalem existed before the state of Israel existed, and it will, God willing, be there forever. So that's a distinct thing, right? That's a historical and spiritual site. It has nothing to do with the government of Israel. But tell me how the government of Israel has been better for us than the government of Qatar. And of course, you can't. So you've got two options. A, you can scream at people and call them Islamists and say you're not really a Christian. You must be worshiping Allah or something. You're a suicide bomber if you go to Doha. And that, intimidates the crap out of a lot of people. And they're like, it's not worth it. Never mind. I'll be quiet. But over time, that doesn't work. Or you can drop politics and statecraft and national interest. You can just change the terms completely of the conversation. You can stop talking about what's best for your country, because neocons are never going to win if those are the terms of the debate. What's best for our country? They're not even contestants in that.
Exactly right. And, I always make the case against any entangling alliances. I think they're destructive for all the reasons that Jefferson and Washington said they would be, that you inherit all the enemies of your allies and you get into debt over these absurd empire-building projects, which the United States has done, especially in the last century and especially in the last half century. But I will make the case here. Qatar hasn't sucked the United States into countless absurd regime change wars in the Middle East, with Libya and Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq being the models. These have been catastrophic, and all of them virtually, and indeed Somalia, have been, at least in partial, tied to the U.S.-Israeli alliance and the idea that we can empire build in the Middle East. Also, Qatar doesn't steal U.S. secrets and have the U.S. ambassador, Mike Huckabee, meet with the convicted felon that served as an Israeli spy within the United States and served a 30-year prison sentence for that. That was Jonathan Pollard. And then you had Mike Huckabee meeting with Jonathan Pollard, the Israeli spy that did that, and we're just supposed to believe there's nothing wrong with that. And not only that, the White House stands by its ambassador. That's what their press release said after that happened. So those are just two reasons why we wouldn't want that to happen. They're also not tarnishing our free speech in the United States with anti-Semitic hate speech laws that do everything that the liberal establishment wanted to do in terms of policing disinformation and policing, attacks against the woke agenda, and the idea that men can't get pregnant was seen as a big threat. They want to do the same thing with anti-Semitic speech laws. So that's what we're dealing with.
No interest in what's best for our country, of course. But you can change the conversation to theology. And you can just say it point blank. God demands that you support the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, who would be vulgar and dumb and reckless enough to say something like that? Who would actually invoke God himself to justify a political alliance with a foreign country?
We all know.
You'd have to be someone who's not worried at all about the afterlife to say something like that, because that is a reckless thing to say. And if you've already guessed Ted Cruz, you're absolutely right. Watch.
I will tell you, there is a movement among Christians, particularly young Christians. The public polling numbers of support for Israel among young Christians is plummeting. And they're being spread lies. They're being spread lies, isolationist lies, that we should withdraw from the world because nobody wants to hurt us. But they're also being spread theological lies. They are being taught replacement theology, which is a lie that the promises God made to Israel and the people of Israel are somehow no longer good. They are no longer valid, that when God made a promise, he didn't mean the promise he made. And instead, it is an argument that the Christian church has replaced Israel and the Jews are no longer God's chosen people, and all of the promises throughout the Bible are now a dead letter. The church needs to engage and say the Bible is not silent on Israel. The Bible is crystal clear on Israel, and in the church we will stand and fight.
It's so absurd in so many ways, and I'll just start with this. He said that essentially non-interventionists want to get out of these entangling affairs because we believe that no one's a threat to America, and that's not the argument. Actually, the argument generally is that we endanger ourselves via these entangling alliances more so than we would otherwise. And just compare the Monroe Doctrine period to the last 100 years, and I think you can see how that's clear, how we're sucked into these entangling affairs in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, in the Pacific over empire-building schemes there, in South America and regime change experiments there, that we wouldn't otherwise be, for, again, the same reasons why Washington and Jefferson were right. And I'm sorry, no, Jews are not the chosen people under Christianity. Every single basic tenet of Christianity throws that to the wayside. The gospel is for all. And if you don't believe me, read Galatians 3. That's the best chapter that explains that the gospel is for all. There is no chosen people on the basis of ethnicity. And God's promise to Abram in Genesis 13:3 doesn't change that whatsoever. Not only wasn't that a bond between God and Israel, which didn't exist, classical Israel didn't even exist at the time of that promise, that was speaking about a bond toward Abram, who would become Abraham and his kin, not the classic kingdom of Jerusalem. And that assurance had nothing to do with the modern Israeli state. It's just so absurd in every single way, but yet so many people buy into this.
Man. You know, it's one thing to get all worked up at the Waco Rotary Club about issues related to Texas, but, here you have a guy who's deep into the things that actually matter, the questions of what happens after we die and what's true, and he has no idea what he's talking about. Like, literally no clue. And I'm not guessing. I'm not attacking the man's faith. I'm just remembering very vividly, because it was this summer when I asked that same guy, Ted Cruz, okay, where specifically does the Bible tell Christians that they have to support Israel? And he had no idea. He meant to misquote a phrase in Genesis, but he couldn't even name the book. And by the way, most people couldn't, and it doesn't even mean that. But whatever, if you're going to have a theology about it, shouldn't you know where it is in the Bible? Shouldn't you be fluent in it? No, because it's all fake. It doesn't mean anything. But
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what he's doing. But again, Galatians 3 asserts that God's promise to Abram was fulfilled in Christ, and now there's a unified body in Christ that does include Gentiles. I'm sorry to say, Ted Cruz, you Christian Zionist. It includes a grand body, much bigger than this ethnically confined one that is now the church. It doesn't require obedience or subservience or support for a modern Israeli state whatsoever.
says it anyway, and this topic actually matters, because it deals not simply with the fate of nations, but the fate of humans. It's real. So to talk like that, the Bible is crystal clear on Israel. Okay. What is Israel as defined by the Bible? I asked him that question too. What does the word mean? What does it refer to? Yes, there are a lot of references to Israel.
It means those that struggle with God. That's what it means, and that was the name bestowed upon Jacob after he literally wrestled with God, and that's what the phrase means. But again, this doesn't obligate Christians to support genocidal regimes, especially the one in Israel, support all of its wars, a war versus Iran, double down on U.S. aid to Israel whatsoever. Not in the slightest.
And to God's love for his people, the Israelites, the Jews, for sure. But in 2025, what exactly does that correspond to? Israel. Okay, and he kept looking at me. Israel, it's Israel. As Huckabee says, Israel. I-S-R-U-L. Okay, got it. Can you define that for me? Is it the modern secular nation state of Israel? The drag queen story hour in Tel Aviv state of Israel? And what borders? Does that include the West Bank, Judea and Samaria? Does that include Gaza? Does that go all the way to Iraq? I mean, what are we talking about here? Shut up! The Bible's crystal clear. Well, of course it's not. But one thing the New Testament is crystal clear about, because it's in every book on every page, is that the way to God is through Jesus. And there aren't any caveats that I've seen. I'm no theology student. I'm no Ted Cruz.
Yeah, that's right. The most basic tenet of the gospel is for all, and Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And the only way to the Creator is through Jesus. It's not through support for a modern Israeli state. Period. No matter what Cruz and charlatans will tell you.
But in every page, it's the same point. The way to God is through Jesus. And by the way, these are Jews speaking, as the early Christians were, and they were speaking to Jews, to their fellow Jews. And they were saying, the way to God, repent of what you're doing now and turn to Jesus. That's what they were saying. Maybe Ted Cruz has another analysis of it. But there's an entire New Testament about this one question. And by the way, if that's wrong, explain how. But of course, they never will. They never will explain how because they don't care. And by the way, there are evangelical Christians in the United States who have a fully developed theology on this question. I don't understand it, and to the extent I do, I don't agree with it. But I don't hate them. I know that I said I did once. I was just frustrated, and I'm sorry, and most of them are really nice people. But I think any person reading a conventional interpretation of the New Testament would conclude the central, really the only unchanging command throughout the entire thing from Matthew to Revelation is believe in Jesus. Everybody.
Yeah, that's right. And Tucker's also right. Most of Jesus's apostles were Jews. They were telling their fellow Jews at the time, what you're practicing is wrong. Jesus has fulfilled the old law, not abolished it. He's fulfilled it. And now the only path to salvation is through Christ. This was a very controversial thing that put most of them to death. It truly did. And Jesus forecast that. He said, you will struggle many ways for my sake. That is true. And some of the earliest converts were Gentiles. And again, this was controversial, but people like Cornelius was converted into Christianity. And this has always been a lightning rod issue because there was never in the 1800 years of Christendom, Christian tradition, there was never this understanding that the gospel obligated people to support a new Israeli state. Not whatsoever. That only came into play in the mid-19th century with people like John Darby and others that said that this was, the new way to interpret the gospel in the right direction. But that was unheard of in 1800 years of Christendom. And it's only been further pushed into the populace and the political zeitgeist through America's entangling alliances with this modern state that are counterintuitive to America.
Everybody. There are no special deals described at all. Everybody believes in Jesus, and that's how you get to God. And people who aren't going to live forever. And I don't see another way. But people like Ted Cruz, of course, are not interested in debating theology, and he didn't even know what book it was in. They're interested in shutting down any conversation on what's in America's interest, making it a theological conversation. And why are they interested in doing that? Because the last justification for supporting Israel above all other countries has evaporated. And what is that? It's the claim that Israel is a uniquely moral nation. And that's why Christianity and also Old Testament Judaism is so often invoked. People of the book, people of God, no one would contest that. But what does that have to do with what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing in 2025? Of course, it has nothing to do with it at all.
And it, in fact, contravenes it. It contravenes all the starvation campaigns, all the subjugation that Israel engages in the West Bank and in Gaza, a refusal to entertain the notion of a two-state solution, the idea of mowing the lawn, going into Gaza periodically, and killing mass Palestinians. That's what they mean when they say that. This idea of a greater Israel project is not the prerogative of any true patriot in America that cares more about the domestic concerns about America, which, by the way, are made a lot worse through this alliance when we get this absurd amount of debt. We've given them something like $350 billion since the creation of Israel. It's only skyrocketed since October 7th. And then we have to be made complicit by our tax money for their genocide in Gaza, giving them intelligence and weaponry and fighting many of their wars with, again, frauds in the United States supporting it. It's not just Israelis and the Israeli government that are guilty. It's certainly not just Netanyahu. It's Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and their allies in the United States, George Bush, Paul Wolfowitz, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, all of them complicit in this murder spree.
The unique decency of Israel is the reason they are our only real ally. And the problem is that what's happened in Gaza over the last 2 years has shown that not only is that not true, it's very close to the opposite of the truth. Now, a lot of us have spent a lot of time doing our best to ignore what's happening in Gaza on the grounds that kind of not our fight. Yes, there are weapons. Yes, we're paying for all of it. Yes, we're giving them cover at the United Nations. Yes, they're really kind of doing this in our name. Bibi is running around the world saying, I've got Trump in my pocket. I can do whatever I want. Trump will defend me. He's told a lot of people that. I control the United States Congress. I control the White House. I control the U.S. He's said that on tape. If you haven't seen it, look it up.
Yeah, Tucker's right about that. In a famous 2000 leaked clip, he tells the videographer, turn off the tape for a second, and then he launches into this soliloquy about how Americans are easily moved. And I hate to say, that's true. We have been on Israel. I hope that no longer is that the case, because it's a total embarrassment and slap to the face to see that being said, and yet it has been true. I hope it comes to an end. There's a lot of evidence that Americans are turning away from this, but our political system is still captured by the Zionists, by AIPAC. And the corporate media is too, but Americans are turning their heads around 180 on this issue in record numbers right now, and that at least inspires and gives me hope.
But a lot of us have thought, look, got enough problems, don't want to get into it. But if you ever do look into what's happened in Gaza since October 7th, it's shocking. Now, it's not the only atrocity on the planet. The Israeli government is not the only bad government. Tons of bad governments. I covered the Liberian Civil War in 2006. There are a lot of bad governments, okay? But among so-called civilized governments, no one has behaved like the Israeli government has behaved in Gaza in a very long time, 80 years at least. It's almost unbelievable.
Yeah, that is accurate, but I will say there are some comparison points, like, say, my criminal government in the United States killing about 5 million people in the war on terror. You know, for the sake of regime change, for the sake of supposedly making America safe, deposing Gaddafi and Assad and Saddam and the Taliban would do that, even though you're replacing ultimately the Taliban with the Taliban. The United States killed about 1 million Iraqis alone, so it's my criminal government that is murderous too. But the thing that just is so unpalatable to most Americans about Israel's atrocities is the United States' connection to Israel makes us complicit in some way. Certainly makes our criminal politicians that support this complicit by giving our money to support this twisted cause.
Tens of thousands of children killed by a country with the most precise military technology in the world, a country that somehow got explosive pagers into the pockets of Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon. These are people who are, again, world-renowned, famous for their skill and their precision. Look at the bombing attack during the 12-day war on Tehran. It was precise. They didn't take out downtown Tehran. They took out IRGC leaders. They took out specific people. They knew exactly where they were. So the idea that they've killed tens of thousands of women and children, non-combatants, accidentally is a lie. No, they murdered them. They murdered them. It's just a fact.
It is, and their own data, a leaked database shows that they know that 83% of the casualties in Gaza were people that were not connected to Hamas or Islamic Jihad as they purport. Like, this is all about Hamas. They're using human shields. You know, they discount these lives and make them into like a second-class tier of people by saying that they're just human shields and we can kill them indiscriminately. Why? Because Hamas uses tunnels. Hamas takes hostages. Well, guess what? That wouldn't fly in the United States. You couldn't take 5 children hostages into a school with two treacherous individuals and then just drop bombs and kill all 7. You just couldn't. It wouldn't fly. It would be premeditated murder. But they use that as an excuse. And their own data says that they are not predominantly killing terrorists. They're killing civilians, plucking up babies from the rubble, and we're supposed to just be totally fine with that. We're supposed to double down on the Zionist Hasbara propaganda and be like, Israel has a right to defend itself. See, look at what they're doing, when it's actually they're carrying out a genocide. And thankfully there's a ceasefire now, but the root causes haven't exactly been addressed, have they? So it's gonna rear its ugly head again, unfortunately.
You can call it whatever you want. Genocide. Everyone's all, why? It's genocide. Okay, it doesn't matter what you call it. That's murder. You're killing people on purpose. Oh, but that always happens in the world. It certainly does. Innocents die in war. That is absolutely right. But in no modern conflict in my lifetime have this many innocents died without any apology at all. So what sets, you hope, the United States government, or has during most of my life, apart from other governments like the government of Israel, is when we kill people who didn't do anything wrong, like children, we are penitent. We apologize. Sometimes we put the people who did it, as in My Lai, for example, in Vietnam, on trial because we don't kill people who didn't do anything wrong, period.
Yeah, I hate to say, here's where I'll push back against Tucker. That's not the case. These mass bombing escapades, not only in my lifetime, but going back to the firebombing in Dresden, the firebombing of Japan, the atomic bombs, the killings of mass innocents in the war on terror in general, show that the United States does this too. And I hate to say it. So it is both the Israeli government and the United States that does this, all in the name of empire building. And the United States is certainly complicit. So that's where I will, diverge from Tucker on this to some extent. I know Tucker has skewered those same policies, so I'm kind of actually confused in a way why he's being so declarative of this, that we don't do this, because, yeah, the criminal government in the United States does this, and you can find videos of Tucker Carlson saying this over and over again pertaining to those exact theaters. So I'm not sure exactly what he's getting unless I'm interpreting him uncharitably here, and I'm not trying to. Let me know in the comments below if you think that he has a point, that somehow that the United States doesn't do this too, because the United States does do this too, and that's one of the biggest problems of non-interventionists with our government.
And yet, for over 2 years, Israel has murdered tens of thousands of children on purpose, and then locked the doors of Gaza, shot dozens and dozens and dozens of journalists so no one can film what's happening, and just leveled the place so they can move the people out and take it. What's the justification for that? What's the excuse? Well, of course, there isn't one. Again, Israel's not the only country that's behaved that way in history, far from it. But no modern country has behaved that way in my lifetime.
Yeah, well, the excuse seems to be that God promised us this. God promised us this country that would engage in genocide, and if you don't support this and you don't double down on this, you don't repeat the Hasbara line, you are the problem, and supposedly you're perverting the scriptures. It's so absurd, but that is what a lot of Christian Zionist charlatans like Ted Cruz are going with. And it's just so inexcusable. I'm so glad that the American right and the dissident right is finally waking up on this in so many regards. It used to be mostly just Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan that would speak about this, and how it's, really, it shouldn't be you have to pick between the Palestinians and the Israelis. There's this side that no one talks about in that arrangement, and it's the American side. The American classic non-interventionist side that Thomas Jefferson promoted and George Washington promoted. He issued the Neutrality Proclamation at the height of the French Revolution. That, global spanning conflict in a way took place in Europe, but had ramifications throughout the world, that everyone wanted to choose a side and said, no, we don't have to choose a side. And in fact, the American thing to do is not choose a side. Well, America has been made complicit in the atrocities of Israel, and Tucker's exactly right. Something like over 20,000 children have been massacred by Israel, starved out, ethnically cleansed, and Smotrich is up there in a West Bank settlement, literally living in a West Bank settlement, saying there will be Israeli settlements in Gaza. They're saying that this cleansing will continue regardless of what's happening with this ceasefire now. And history indicates they're not exactly bluffing on that one. And the U.S. should just get out of there. Get our bases out of the Middle East. Stop slapping our servicemen in the face with these absurd deployments and putting them in harm's way to the point that you have to pray that Iran, even when backed into a corner, doesn't launch attacks against our troops. And by the way, they didn't. Why? They don't want a war with the United States, even though Israel once continued war with Israel. Keeps talking about it. Netanyahu's continued to clamor with the same propaganda used to prop it up, saying that, they're going to detonate a nuke above Boston or New York City. He has recently said that to Ben Shapiro, and Shapiro is happy to parrot that propaganda to get the United States back in this thing. and enter into a regime change with U.S. boots on the ground. Not Israeli boots on the ground, but U.S. boots on the ground. That's what they want, and they won't stop with that propaganda until they get it. They've been saying that Iran is close to a nuke for days, minutes, months, weeks, basically since I was born. That is what is the truth. But what do you guys think? Do you think Tucker Carlson's right? Is the U.S.-Israeli alliance twisted? Are the atrocities in Gaza indefensible? Is there any benefit Americans get whatsoever from this alliance? Well, alliance in quotes, I should put it. Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Tucker Carlson. One of his best monologues I've seen in a long time. It's classic Tucker at his best. And I'm so glad that he is out there on the American right telling the truth about this issue when the neocons have sold lies about it for so many years. But also, if you like this video, please consider joining as a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button down below. And if you do that, you can gain access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll send you off to a website. You just plug in your email there, and I'll send you that PDF of that book to you free of charge, just because I appreciate you watching. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.